Welcome to The Factor, a podcast series from the life sciences industry powered by Kymanox. Today's episode is hosted by Shannon Hoste, Vice President of Human Factors Engineering at Kymanox, and our guests are Naveen Agarwal, Principal and Founder of Let's Talk Risk, a newsletter about the collective capability in risk management across the global medical device industry, and Nate Blazei, Senior Director of Regulatory Affairs at Kymanox. They're talking about the Quality Management System Regulation, or QMSR, final rule, which the FDA issued on January 31st, 2024, establishing requirements and provisions that clarify expectations and concepts used in ISO 13485-2016. Together, they unpack the switch from QSR to QMSR. Here's Naveen.
So on paper, FDA is telling us that the impact is not going to be high. But you know what? I actually don't believe that. I know they have done a lot of analysis and economic impact and this and that. But to me, whether you are a small organization or a large organization, it is going to have an impact. And the biggest impact in my mind is going to be how you actually conduct your business, how you do quality management in the first place. Of course, there'll be impact on documentation, on your entire process. But more than anything else, I think the impact would be in how actually you do things.
You know, as you mentioned, there are companies that only operate, let's say, in the United States and market their products in the United States. They don't really spend a lot of time thinking about ISO 1345. And so for them, I think they're definitely the ones who have the biggest burden to clear with respect to the QMSR. They're going to have new nomenclature, new processes. We'll probably talk about some of that today. For those who are global, you know, this may not feel that drastic of a change. And they might actually welcome it because of the fact that, oh, now we only have one kind of harmonized QMS that we have to worry about. We're not, operating two models depending on the region we're putting our products in. So I think we'll cut into this a little bit more. But I think, the smaller or the, US focused companies are the ones that I feel bad for a little bit, because this is going to be a big change. As Naveen mentioned, it's not going to be, flip a switch and you're compliant. There's going to be some work and transitioning.
Mm-hmm. I think too about the folks working in combination products too, who have a device constituent part in the impact of this change on any work they may be doing now. That plays out a few different ways, right? You could have a device group within a pharmaceutical company, and this may impact them more than maybe the medical device manufacturers who make products for combination product. They're already a little more focused in the med device space. So I want to dive into this a little bit more and dive into the risk management. So wanted to talk a little bit more, and this is for Naveen, about the role of risk management and how is that different from the QMS to the QMSR?
Yeah, excellent question. I think the biggest point I want to highlight, Shannon, is that traditionally, my experience has been that risk management has been considered to be like something else, something other, something we have to do. The biggest impact in my mind is that risk management is not separate anymore. It is expected to be integrated throughout the processes of our QMS, and FDA expects to see more of a process-based approach to quality assurance and not just as a compliance activity. So at the very high level, that's what I meant when I said that it's a change in mindset that is needed. And I have worked in organizations that were global, and they had ISO 13485 compliance, they had QSR compliance, they were playing in all over the world. And still, I should tell you that the risk management was considered to be something else. That approach has to change, because risk management is no longer something else, but part of the entire system. It's a foundation of the entire system, and that's why it cuts across everywhere, which is where we'll have to recognize what are the interfaces between our processes, because it is that interface where the weak points are.
Absolutely. And I remember back when 1345-2016 came out, because it was a pretty significant update to incorporate risk management throughout the life cycle with that update that came out in 2016. And I remember working within global organizations that were 13485 compliant and thinking through how do you apply that risk-based decision-making throughout your life cycle. And I see something similar. So now if an organization has primarily been focused on 820 and working off of the FDA requirements, they need to also then go through some of those transitions from risk-based thinking. Any advice that from thinking back to 2016 and some of the challenges organizations had in updating to 2016, any thoughts on lessons learned or any of the big pieces that stick in your mind, that challenges that people faced then?
I think that using a process-based approach, which means you have to look at every process in terms of inputs and outputs. And that is where, I'm an engineer by training, so I speak more sort of engineering language to quality.
Mm-hmm.
Thinking about this as a process and system of processes, which means that we have to really think about what goes in, what comes out, and what happens in the black box, right? So all our procedures should be linked to each other. They should recognize these connectivities. And what I would recommend is, first of all, don't panic. That's the first thing I would say. Because you are already doing stuff. You're already manufacturing product. You're already designing and building products. And if they're in the marketplace, they are theoretically safe and effective. So don't panic. What you have to do is sit down and take a careful look at how things get done. What are the key processes? Can we identify 5 to 10 big processes in our system? And just walk each process, see where the connecting points are. So I would ask not to jump into updating your procedures right away, because we're going to seek compliance, but rather look at what we are doing today, how our activities are interlinked with each other, where are the connecting points, draw it out, make a process map, and then see which aspect is covered in which procedure. And I think you have covered actually a lot of it already, because you have a system that works for you, right? So there is no need to kind of take a drastic approach. That's what I would say.
Mm-hmm. The whole goal with QMS and risk management in general is to have a systematic way of thinking about things. So,
yes. Well, so you are right. I mean, that is what is intended. That is what is expected. I think on the ground level, in practice, though, we seem to be working in our own space, systematically in our own space. But we don't understand the connectivity with other processes. And it is at that interface which is where things break down. And then we don't know, first of all, who to go to, because nobody owns the interface, right? And then our procedures don't help us identify these interconnections and interfaces in an easy way. They do, but you really have to dig deeper. So when a breakdown happens, let's say between complaints and CAPA, let's say there's a breakdown, we don't know who to go to. Do I go to the complaints department? Do I go to the quality department? Who takes care of that? So I think this is where how we do business actually will go through a big change in our practice. So what I would recommend is, as you do gap assessments, just sit back and observe for at least a couple of weeks, have people walk different processes and take notes. What is flowing in? What is flowing out? Is this input coming from something else? Is this output going to somewhere else? Draw it out and then sit down and see, where are some potential gaps that we may have to address. This is actually the essence of a risk-based approach, because you will realize where there might be a potential for disruption. And what we don't want is disruption between these processes.
Building on that thought, I think, if you can find places in all of your major quality management system elements, you mentioned CAPA, but let's talk about any type of investigation, even on the design and development product realization side, you need to figure out, where does risk come into the equation? Where do we have a link back to the risk management file for the product? And you'll probably be surprised that it's all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
But yet, if we treat it, as you mentioned, like this other activity that's going on, somebody over here in this department owns the risk management file, and they don't have that link back, that connection, that trigger in a procedure to go and talk and to do some sort of action, it really does feel like we're not getting the benefit out of what risk management can provide. A lot of, what I see today is, if you build risk management at the core of your QMS, everything kind of launches off from that. Because at the end of the day, we're trying to make a benefit risk determination for any product that goes out for approval. It's all about benefit and risk, right? Is it safe? Is it effective? Am I going to hurt anybody? Is it going to fix the unmet need? And so to me, just building your QMS around risk is kind of a mind shift that we have to undergo as an industry. And, I think the biggest change will be that mindset, as companies, go from the former QSR to the QMSR. There's actually going to be a demand to have a process established. It wasn't really specified in the old regulations, which are still current, of course. But if you go to ISO, you see it in numerous clauses where, risk management has to come out and play. So anyway, just wanted to add that to the discussion.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think what I will point out here is that indeed, yes, if you go to 13485, for example, it would say output of risk management should flow into design inputs. The problem on the ground level is we don't know which output to go where. Believe me, when I teach risk management in my training classes to folks, these fundamental principles sort of are not well understood because the standards doesn't tell us which output should go where and which output from the design should come back into the risk management. We don't have a closed loop system. Case in point, ISO 14971 tells you must do characteristics related to safety. Well, guess what? Everybody looks up Annex A now, all those questions, makes a table, and that's the end of it. But that's not the intent of characteristics related to safety analysis. The intent is to feed that directly into your design input. How many people know this in the industry?
Yeah. Or have the systems and the tactical ways to implement that, right?
Yeah, because people think that once I have done this table, check the box, I can file in my RMF that I have done characteristics related to safety, I'm good. But when I go to look at design inputs and I ask people, which specific design input is coming from your risk identification phase, people cannot tell me straight away. So I think we have an opportunity here to help our colleagues understand exactly which output goes where, which output from design phase comes back into the risk management file. And everybody knows, post-market surveillance, fine, you have to go update your risk files. But nobody knows what to update and where to update. So I'm more on that's why I'm coming from the practitioner side. I understand where the day-to-day challenges are, and people are really, really struggling with that. And to me, training is helping to some extent, training is helping, but not enough because there is no ongoing support and sort of go-to place where you can get simple questions answered, which is what, my focus is in my, that's what I'm trying to do through the Let's Talk Risk platform is to help people have that support on an ongoing basis in a practical way.
Yeah, absolutely. I have had the opportunity to work in several different organizations on different product types. And one of the opportunities I had was in a very well-developed software product lifecycle. And what I saw there, because of the traceability requirements in software development, was a much more developed system that had the elements of risk management and design controls, but had full traceability across them. And having had a chance to see that, I really imagine, if I'm conceptualizing risk management, as the backbone, the spine of a project. And all information can, by and large, flow into and out of the risk management, and it helps you capture information, act on it, capture your decision making. All of that is happening within that risk management process if it's fully connected. It's so powerful to see it. Mm-hmm. But once you then take that same process and move it over to something that is maybe more paper-based, then a lot of the traceability requirements become manual, and it becomes very difficult to tactically execute to that level. Is a challenge.
For sure, yeah.
I find that some of the newer, technology software tools will make that traceability, connection really strong. And I understand not everybody wants to invest in new technology, but you really have to stay state of the art. I mean, manual is just, it's almost like it has to become extinct, at some point here, because there's so many great tools out there to make your life easier. Why aren't you using them? That's kind of my approach, but you can make it work manually. But like you said, it's a lot harder to link all those factors together into a common risk framework. So I commiserate with companies that haven't really moved into more sophisticated technology, but over time, they'll get there.
Yeah, and I going back to something Naveen said earlier, the software tools will help. I think the first step is going through and mapping out those processes, identifying where I'm going to carry my spine analogy forward, where those nerves need to travel out to have information going back and forth. The process mapping and information flow mapping, defining that, and then finding the right tool to help you do that efficiently it's very valuable, but it's a challenge just going to it's work.
And I think we just need to ask simple questions to people because they're doing the work. They know. We ask simple questions like, how would you know if something goes wrong? What measures, what indicators do you follow? What do you track? Here's one of the biggest weaknesses in our systems today, in my experience, what I've seen, is that the measures we use to estimate risk in the design phase and at launch do not correspond to measures we use in the post-market phase. And as a result, we can't tell if the risk has changed. 14971 wants us to figure out if the risk has changed. But if we don't have the right measures which are related to each other in the right way, how can we tell? We cannot look at a chart of, they say trend and monitor. Oh, this point goes a little bit up. This is down. This is up. We can't tell anything because we don't have these measures which relate well to what we have done in design phase to estimate the risk. So we need to ask people, hey, what measures are you using and how would you know if it has changed? If the answer is, yes, I do this calculation, that calculation, boom, that's what you put in your procedure. And if they say, you know what, I never thought about this because everything has flowed so well so far. Not because something is broken, but it has worked for me, I never noticed. Well, let's sit back and ask, what if there was a bad part coming in? I'm using analogy of a manufacturing process. What if a bad part was coming in? Similarly, what if a signal was coming from the post-market? How would you know that is worth paying attention to if we don't know what to compare it to? So this process mapping exercise, I think, can be very beneficial for the quality practitioners or risk practitioners because let's face it, we are not process engineers in general. We are not design engineers. We have to work with engineers, but we can ask the right questions. We can say, how would we know if the input coming into our process is corrupted? That's like a software language. And how would we know that the output we are sending out to the next process in the quality management system is correct? What are the measures? Because guess what's going to happen? It's going to allow us to monitor effectiveness, which is what the regulatory authorities are looking for, right? They're looking for effectiveness, not that you have a piece of paper, check the box, you have done it. So Shannon, I want to bring back the conversation that you just started. What will be the biggest change is we are not looking for whether you have something or not. We are looking for evidence that it's working for you. And how would you know it's working for you? You need to know what to measure and what to compare it against. So very, very simple. I like to kind of boil it down to a simple sort of framework of mind, which is common sense. And I think if we let people go and really investigate the process, learn the process, and map it out, I think we can do a fantastic job. It's not that difficult.
So what do you think with this update? So these new considerations. So I think we're talking about effective risk management. And as we make this switch, as companies make this switch from QSR to QMSR, what are some of the key areas that they should be looking at? So we've talked a little bit about how they can start understanding what they're doing and how to improve it. But what are some other key considerations?
So Shannon, I think if we are looking at an existing running operation with multiple products in the marketplace, they have already well-established systems. I would recommend that we start with our post-market process and try to build the connectivity from the far end, because I think that is where we have a lot of data, we have a lot of information, and we should start to learn how to connect the dots and see if it's flowing back into our design process or not. So that will be, in my mind, the first thing to do. But if we are not, let's say we are a startup, we are building a product, we are not even in the marketplace, I think we should start focusing our attention on the early risk identification phase. Do we have enough clinical and use information in addition to our functionality information for the device to be able to identify all applicable. Do we have a good sort of starting point, a roadmap of what we should monitor and control? So it depends upon where we are in the life cycle of our business, what we do. Within an established organization, you might have some very early stage startup ventures or efforts. And I think you might want to adjust your approach where to start from. That would be the important point. But once you have a starting point, you have to go back to the entire chain, go through the entire chain to build it, right? That would be kind of my first attempt. And hey, I'd love to hear from your view because you have a very diverse perspective. How would you go about doing that? That's a very good question.
You bring up some good examples of like small companies, first product out the door, and then let's say a global company that has multiple products already on the market, and the approach to risk management in general and even their QMS is going to be quite different. But the same general theme should run throughout, which is we're trying to build safe and effective products here, right? As an example for like the smaller company, let's say they lack data. I think this is a real problem, not just with small companies, by the way. I'm someone who kind of challenges probability estimates all the time because we don't always get to see when things go wrong, and complaints only take up some fraction of the real, let's say error rate out there or the failure rates out there. But you got to start with something. And so I think one of the challenges with a small company is like, what do we use as our baseline? Is it a qualitative scoring to start? And do we just work through that and really focus on, the harm, the severity of harm? And for anything that's certainly going to impact, life and death situation or put someone in the hospital, you spend a lot more time on that, and some of the, more nuisance related harms, maybe you spend a little less time on. Then once it's further along, maybe it's on the market, you get approval. Now you've got that post-market piece coming back. And granted, we only get a sliver of the total picture, but it's a starting point. I think that's an area where I commiserate with the small companies on like, well, what do we use for our data set? And there's a lot of approaches out there, but if they adopt good practices following the ISO 14971 framework, I mean, there's a lot of great tools in there. And I think you just have to make it sort of commensurate with the type of product that you're developing too, right? There's, very simple devices, class 1 in the US versus, class 3, let's say an implantable. And the level of rigor should sort of follow the complexity of that device or that product. And so I think for the small companies, my mind goes there quickly because I feel like they don't always have the resources and they may not have all the expertise they need. So where do they start? You get to these bigger global companies, they have, a massive workforce that they can throw at a problem. But I think even in those situations, I'm very curious how well they do of feeding back data into their original risk assessments.
Yeah.
I mean, that's an area where when I audit, I find it's not really happening as frequently as I would like. But then I also wonder, well, what is the right frequency? What are the trigger points for doing an update? And are they even collecting good data and challenging their assumptions from 5 years ago when they first set out developing a product?
I can share some thoughts on that if that's okay with you guys. The first point I'll make is that even if you have no data, you can make an estimate. The only thing that you have to be careful about is your level of confidence. So as engineers, we are very used to doing this. We can't work without estimates. However, we are also very mindful of our level of confidence in that estimate. And over time, it improves. So you could actually tell people, what is your best guess based on whatever you know? And somebody says, my guess is X. And let's say I'm like, not even close, but I'm closer than I would be if I were at 0. So make incremental progress, monitor your level of confidence, and improve that over time. Be honest. Engineers ask them, hey, how confident are you? If it's, I'm like 50-50, we got more work to do. So what kind of data would you need to improve your level of confidence? Don't wait for post-market. That's what I will say. The second thing I would say in terms of creating this process big companies run on organizations. You need to have a process, you need to have governance, you need to have structure. About 15 years or so, 15 years ago, when post-market was not even on the radar, I got a chance to build a post-market safety surveillance system from scratch. Procedures, templates, forms, and then they asked me to run it for 2 years. Build a team. We built a team. Guess what? For a $4 billion business, we ran that with a team of 3 people part-time. Okay, so it can be done. You just need to have a project management mindset. You need to negotiate with your management what resources you will need, because it's a clear conversation. They wanted to do this. So I think that's another thing. The business needs to want to do it. And we were in a situation following a massive recall, very embarrassing recall. Patients didn't get hurt, but very embarrassing recall. We were in a situation where we were looking for strengthening our processes. And that was a great time to be in that business. So we were motivated, and I said, this is what I will need. There's a pushback. Hey, you're asking for too much. So you figure out the best you can do to run a process. So think, I'm sorry, I keep repeating the word process because it is so important. I don't want to underemphasize this at all. Who you will need, how much time will be needed from them. We met on a monthly basis, by the way. So the frequency was pretty good. And we produced outputs that could be used on an annual basis to just compile our CER right away. So we were building efficiencies of scale. We had the opportunity to go directly to the executive board. Okay, so we could say, hey, this signal we're going to escalate. We need action. So they would ask us, okay, how would you do it? Say, let's do a kappa. Who's going to do the kappa? Well, I'll do the kappa. I run the process, I'll own the kappa. So what I'm trying to say is that you build a system, you build a structure, you get organizational support, you build accountability, and you get people who are committed to serving in that role. And we were able to bring that information back into our design process. Every new product that was put into the design pipeline had to go through that initial evaluation of all the information that we were supplying, identify the inputs and outputs. So we basically created a pipeline within 2 years. So that practical sort of know-how can be brought into our practice, which is what I try to do here, share with people, and apply more of a process-based approach with this project management mindset. I hope that is helpful in some ways. I didn't mean to confuse you, but I just wanted to share my experience with you to tell you that it can be done if we take sort of a cross-functional project management-based approach to this.
Something else I heard both of you talking about was, if you're looking at needing to update your processes, or you're looking to want to improve your processes, or incorporate risk management throughout your development process, look and identify where you have data. So, like the example of if you're on market already and you have post-market data, maybe that's where you start to dig in. Look at that data and then think from there, how is that data being incorporated and so forth. If you're a startup and your data is more on the front end, the literature review type research of similar products, maybe you're starting early in that process and you're looking forward rather than back. But what I heard was identify where you have data and start there. And if you don't have data, figure out how to get it, which is what I heard from your last example was.
And what you need. Most importantly, ask what do you need?
Mm-hmm.
If you ask the question, what you need, the follow-up question would be, help me understand why you need it, how it will connect us to our final end game, and then figure out how we will get it. And if you don't have any data, you can do a quick survey, by the way. Like you can talk to 5 doctors, do a quick survey, right? Do something, because something is better than nothing. If it is too little, assign a very high zone of uncertainty around it. And you will see which circle is bigger than what it needs to be. Not every circle is going to be more critical than everything else. So I think when you begin to have a little bit of a structured, sort of a disciplined approach, asking questions, always be data. I'm sorry, I'm not in favor of a qualitative rating scale. I know it is written in the standard, but that's to me hand waving. Because When you say qualitative scale, you are asking people to just guess. Okay, fine. Then ask, what is that guess based on? Write it down.
Mm-hmm.
So just having a qualitative scale to me is not acceptable. I would say, okay, if you want to rate it 3, what are you basing it on? Help me understand that so I can write it down. And I'm going to ask you, could it be a 2? Could it be a 4? Right? So I think we have to, as practitioners, we have to facilitate that conversation. Data, data, data as much as possible. We live in the age of data. I don't believe for 1 minute that we cannot get data.
It's a great point. Yeah, the qualitative ones, I mean, you mentioned like your confidence factor, it would be pretty low on those, right? Because it's limited to the group of people in the room who maybe are, throwing the score out. But I love the idea of documenting your assumptions or your
Yeah.
rationale, because at least it's there.
I think it could be high. It could be high. I just need to know who's giving me the score and what is their basis, and I will trust them. Right? So you're right. You're right. In most cases, it could be kind of not reliable. And in that case, I'll say to the team, guys, it's fine to get started with this, but we can't go to market with this. We can't. So let's put in our clinical plan, clinical investigation plan. We're going to gather this data to make sure our adverse event rates estimates are meaningful. So planning comes into place, right? But if the clinician upfront says this is such a routine device, it's used everywhere, we have seen it practiced many, many, many times. If you reduce these types of failure modes, I can guarantee your adverse event rate will be 1 in 10,000. I can trust that.
Something I just heard there in the example that you gave to me is an example of risk-based decision making in clinical evaluation support. It could be clinical, it could be feasibility, but in your testing and your evaluation of your design, not only just, hey, this is a high risk, we need to understand it better, but the example you gave was, we don't know the potential for this to happen. We don't know the probability of which this can happen. And so that assessment on risk, that level of uncertainty, is helping you make decisions based on what you need to evaluate and test and learn more about.
Yeah.
And I think to me that is the essence of what 1345 is looking for with
absolutely
the discussion of risk-based decision.
Yeah, it drives those design inputs, as Naveen already mentioned, right? You've got these great questions around, where could harm occur, right? Where could we have issues? And then you kind of create, through your design and development, you create inputs, you go and test those, you get the feasibility understood, and you move along and continually reevaluate. So, on that topic too, I'd love to hear your opinions on like how you think the industry at large is doing with respect to life cycle approaches to risk management. I do think this new QMSR is going to push everyone to do a little bit more of this life cycle approach. And it's not a one and done activity, although based on my auditing, I feel like a lot of companies think that's what it is. Well, it's not, at least not anymore. There's no more room to hide, really. You have to, maintain your risk management practices throughout the product's life cycle. So curious what you both think on, what is the pulse of the industry? Are you seeing improvements even before QMSR hits officially? What's your take, Naveen?
So, first of all, I will acknowledge that there are pockets of excellence in our industry. So whatever I say should not be taken as this a general thing or our industry. Our industry is awesome. I think we make beautiful products that save lives. We have tremendous engineers. Where we are lacking is sort of responsibility throughout the life cycle, meaning like our best people generally move on to the next big thing as soon as the product is out of the door. And we don't have that commitment from them. When things go bad in the marketplace, they have to give up what they're working on to come back and help us. So to me, the weak point really is in this chain post-market is the weakest link. And the reason, personally, my experience has been, I would love to hear from you as well. You guys are very close to different organizations than I am. My experience is much limited than yours. I think one of the biggest reason is that we have not considered post-market anything more than just complaints handling. We have just treated complaints handling because that is what 820 wants us to do, maintain files, do investigation, write justifications. The best we can do is feed it into our CAPA process. Then our hands are gone. We're done. But we have not treated this as a surveillance process. Surveillance is more than what I call vigilance. We are doing vigilance, but not surveillance. Surveillance is looking for patterns. It's an engineering exercise. It's a business decision-making exercise in the absence of a lot of data, a lot of ambiguity, which is what I got my hands dirty, by the way. I have so many kind of scars on my back. I'll tell you a funny story. The first time, and I work with brilliant statisticians, brilliant people. The first time we asked them to use some sophisticated statistical analysis to detect signals, they came back with 30 signals. 30. For a mature, very high volume, very reasonably kind of stable, low risk product. Say, oh my God, 30 signals. If I'm going to chase each one of these 30 signals, I will basically shut down. So statistics and data analysis can help us a lot, but it cannot help us make the decision. So the question was, which out of these 30 should we really care about? So we built a decision-making process on top of it. We built criteria-based decision-making process. Say, here are 4 characteristics. You have a low, medium, high scale. You have a grid, 4x3 grid. Put every signal on this grid, and I will create a zone that will tell me which signals I should care about. So from 30, we came down to 4. 4 is manageable. We didn't give up on the remaining 26. That became our tracker. So we're going to track these 26 next month. If they still are triggered based on statistical analysis, we'll reapply our 4x3 grid. Maybe some more of them will follow. So we created a kind of a pipeline of a process of detecting signals, confirming signals, and escalating signals. So as a result, we were able to manage the volume, because we used to get like literally hundreds of complaints every month, not because the product is unsafe, but it's a high volume mass product. So a lot of people will call us. And most of the cases, there are a lot of other issues than just product design. So we were able to kind of narrow it down. And I think it can be done very effectively if we just begin to ask those meaningful questions, how are we making decisions? And we do this in daily life too, right? We don't react to every single thing that shows, props up. Like, we have to prioritize. So I think the point of the risk-based decision really is paying attention to how we can facilitate good decision making for our business, for our customers, for our doctors. We have to look at both. We have to look all of them. So I hope that kind of explanation I provided to you can help people understand how they can begin to even attack this, which is where I believe the intent is. I believe the intent of QMSR, even QSR, the intent was the same. If you read the preamble, it's common sense, but I don't think FDA has any enforcement authority. So the only difference I see right now with QMSR 13485 being incorporated by reference is that they can cite you. They can cite you specifically where you are failing to meet your obligation to risk management. Previously, they couldn't. They could write you up only in 82030G, right? So that is the only difference I see, but I don't think we need to wait for that. We need to kind of do it to ourselves and say, how can we make this part of our working process so that we don't have to wait for the FDA and come and give us a warning letter on it? Because I know they'll write us now.
Yeah, I think proactive. Speaking of that, the timing and the implementation for the process.
So I've heard 2 years, right, guys?
2 years, yep.
February 2nd, 2026.
Yep. And it sounds like the thought is that it would force to the QSR up until that date and then transition over. So it's some interesting dynamics I think there might be there. Any advice for folks as they're thinking about how to tackle the next 2 years?
I think that you might be in a better position to answer that question. I don't do too many audits.
So this is, I've seen some chatter already out there on LinkedIn and other sources about that. And, do we maintain 2 systems if we want to be proactive and start moving into the QMSR now, but yet I'm being enforced to the QSR, it's challenging. My advice is to create a plan, a planning document that says this is how we're going to transition and when. Have it very clearly identified and what you're going to do within your QMS to make those changes happen. And if any inspector comes along, let's say it's not the 2 year window is not done, and they see that plan, I'd be very, very shocked if you got some kind of a finding, for being proactive. And so I would just caution industry to not panic, right? Make a plan, figure out where your gaps are, understand the new rules, and then implement that plan. And for some companies, it might only take a few months. If you have a really simple QMS and it's not impacting a lot of different products, you're not going to need to sweat too much. For others who are, bigger companies, lots of products, more complexity, you might need all of that 2 years because you have internal systems and governance that just takes a while to get through. So I wouldn't wait, to be honest. I would start, getting used to the nomenclature. DHF is going away. How many times are we going to continue to see that afterwards? It's going to happen. I'd like to think the agency will, have some leeway on terminology, right? Because it's really not as important as the real activities you're doing. But you have to start kind of training your teams to use the new language, to have the risk-based process thinking throughout your QMS, and to really just understand the ISO standard back, forwards and backwards. I mean, we've got a lot of time. I was thinking the FDA was pretty generous with 2 years personally, but I understand, there are companies who might feel like that's short and they're trying to be accommodating. So I do think just take it at your own pace, build a plan, and attack it. I don't know, Naveen, what do you think?
No, you're absolutely right. And actually, I'll just add one thing to what you said. I actually recommend people using a quality plan to manage changes to their risk management file as well. So what I tell people is that you don't have to go, change your risk management file or update your risk management file at every small thing that happens in your system, because there are many moving parts and you will be wasting so much time in documentation and change control. Not needed. Prioritize it. There are some changes you must do almost immediately. Some changes you can do maybe as part of a CAPA closeout checklist. Some changes you could do in bulk twice a year. But if you have written it down, nobody can say your risk management file is not complete. Well, we know it's never going to be complete because we have a product in the marketplace. But it should be as complete as it needs to be at any given time. So I just thought of it that I didn't want that point to be lost, but you bring up a great point. Sooner the better. If you think you can transition in 3 months from now, why not? Flip the switch. You'll have a lot of practice. Even the inspectors are being trained on this, right? So by the time a fully trained QMSR inspector shows up on your door, you will have plenty of practice. So why not? Why wait? It's not a flip the switch. So I totally agree with what you're saying. And it's a great practice for companies to do a quality plan.
I did want to say one thing, and this is a bit of a devil's advocate, so I'm going to poke the bear on this one. But what it is written in the final rule, it says the FDA does not, in this rulemaking, incorporate ISO 14971 or any other standards referenced by or listed in 1345, but acknowledges that those standards may be helpful in understanding application of ISO 1345. As we wrap up, any parting on that?
Well, I'm really glad you poked that bear because I did that myself this morning. I posted on LinkedIn a simple statement from the FDA. I've been reading FDA's QMSR final rule, and there's a lot of confusion about whether 14971 is mandatory or not. It's not. It's not even mandatory in EU MDR. But that doesn't mean you should not do it. So I always tell people, you can claim to be the best in the world in risk management. You can claim to be, and we can believe you if you can show it. If you can say, I'm better than 14971, this is what I do, it's perfectly acceptable. You don't have to do 14971. But if not, you have something already available to you, a result of more than 25 years of hard work by a lot of smart people. Why would you want to throw it away out of the window? So if you are telling me that, you know what, I really don't want to do it because it's not written anywhere, I would say to you, you are welcome to do that, but you'll have a very hard time explaining to somebody why you decided not to do it. So in some ways, Shannon, I'm very glad that FDA did not mandate this, because I don't think you can mandate everything, especially when you are trying to encourage people to have good habits. I mean, I've teenagers now, and no matter how much you want to mandate, nobody wants to follow your rules. So all you can hope for is have them build good habits. I'm not going to be there checking everything off. So I love the idea that FDA is telling us it is the best practice. We recognize that as a consensus standard. The whole world believes in it, but we leave it to you. You are free to do whatever you want. And by the way, if you have something better, show us. And not only show us, get involved in the ISO committee and bring that knowledge so that the whole world can benefit from you, right? So I love it that they want us to do well. And I hope industry will take that as an opportunity to say, yes, we are glad we don't have another compliance burden. We don't have to kind of, however, if you write it in your procedures, we are following 14971, you don't have any other choice. So you could say, here is our process, but don't call it 14971. Or you could say, we follow 14971, then make sure you comply to it. So I went on a soapbox because it's my favorite topic, because I do risk management for a living, right? It would be very easy for me to tell people, listen to me, because if you don't, you'll get in trouble with the FDA, right? That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying, please work with me because it's the right thing for you to do. So that's my take on it. Nate, do you want to share?
Oh, I completely agree with you. A lot of head nodding over here. You said it very well, and I agree that it's nice that you have the flexibility, but both FDA and the ISO standard are pointing to this ISO 14971. It's there. A lot of great, foundational material you can use. You can customize your own tools. You don't have to use what's listed in there, but it is a very straightforward, logical framework. I don't want to say you'd be crazy not to use it, but I mean, in some ways you would be, because it's a really well thought out process for doing risk management. So, but if you want, like you said, if you have something better, bring it to the table. I don't think you're gonna get penalized for that. But I also think you made a great point where if you say you are complying with that standard, ISO 14971, then you need to do it, right? And I think I've seen in my auditing experience that there's some room for improvement on this topic, where they think one activity, all of a sudden they're in good standing. Well, more often than not, we're struggling in some of these companies that I've audited. So we've got work to do, but we've got great tools. A lot of smart people got their heads together to develop these standards, and take advantage of them. Like you said, use it to your advantage. Don't use all of it if you don't need it, right? But it's there. I like to use the things that are there and not reinvent the wheel myself.
Yeah, absolutely.
And 24971 with further guidance.
Absolutely.
Yes. And by the way, 13485 also has a companion guidance document written by ISO TC 210 committee. Mm-hmm. I strongly recommend those who are not practicing 13485 to actually get that, because it explains the why behind the regulation. Sorry, the why behind the standard clause, mm-hmm. and some tips on how to execute that. So it's almost like a guidebook to you. You can just use that. 13485 can also be used.
Excellent. And actually, on that similar point, within that final rule, there's actually posting, and maybe we post these links below in our broadcast, to read-only copies of the international standards. So through the standards ANSI, ANSI standards incorporated by reference portal. So we can include those links too for folks that may not have access to the standards as well.
Great.
Excellent. Well, it has been awesome to talk to you both today, and I think we could probably talk for another hour.
Yes.
Easily. Yep.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thanks for having me.
That was Shannon Hoste, Naveen Agarwal, and Nate Blazei. For more on Naveen, check out his Let's Talk Risk Substack at naveenagarwalphd.substack.com. Thank you so much for listening to or watching this episode. Please subscribe or follow this podcast in whatever app you're using right now, or follow Kymanox on LinkedIn for all updates. This episode was edited and produced by Earfluence. We'll see you again soon on The Factor.